Hello everyone, welcome. Hello subscribers, hello followers. I'm glad you're here with me today again. All right, I was going to talk about diplomacy. I'm still going to talk about it, but I thought, okay, how do I start this? Much needed these days as the world is going through so many crises. Diplomacy is more than compromise. Compromise is just making you see that, if you A, give up this, and you B, give up this, you may lose a little and win a little, each one of you, and you reach a compromise. Diplomacy, I believe, is a little bit more than that. Diplomacy is about persuasion, convincing the other that there are, yes, causes to your action, but also consequences, and to consider those. It's the art of persuasion, I think. So I thought, okay, so I'm going to talk first about persuasion. How do I do this? So, yes, I went back again to the classics, and I went back to the sophists. This is about 5th century BC, okay? The sophist, it was not a school. The sophist was originally an educated person with a certain amount of experience in one field or more of learning. Sophos means clever, skillful, wise even. But by the 5th century BC, it came to have a different connotation, something much more specific than that. It was a person who made a profession and earned a living by offering techniques of rhetoric and oratory. Being good at public speaking was very much a highly prized skill at the time, because societies were still immersed in the oral tradition, oral culture, and certainly one where the reputations and the status of individuals was based largely on how they performed in public debate, in advocacy. What was important was eloquence and the power of persuasion and command over an audience. And because this was so highly prized, this skill, the sophists made a very good living teaching it. Socrates and Plato disliked the sophists very much on the grounds not that they were actually teaching it, that they were offering themselves to teach it per se, but because they did it for money. That is, that for money you taught how to persuade others to any point of view, which meant really, at the end of the day, how to win an argument, not how to discover in their mind, not how to discover the truth, but to make people skillful in how to convince others, as it were. And they thought that was appalling. And because of their influence, Plato, Socrates, now the word sophist has a sort of a negative connotation to this day, really. So to talk about the act of bamboozling others into your own way of thinking, we call that sophistry. And actually the word sophisticated, which now is used to describe, refined taste or superlative elegance and the like, in its original meaning implied deliberately made to appear something more complicated than it really was, in order to mislead others. That was the original meaning of sophisticated. Now, this view of the sophist, to tell the truth, it was not entirely fair, because the sophist also taught that they also taught what was required to be a good public speaker. You needed more than just being good with words. In other words, there is little use to being eloquent if you have nothing to be eloquent about. So if you know no history, no literature, no philosophy, you don't know how to think critically and so on, if you have never reflected about right and wrong, or the state of society, or how to have a good and successful life. In other words, reflection is also necessary. So I'm going to give you just a few cases in point of some of the best known sophists. One of them was Protagoras. And Protagoras lived between 490 and 420 BC. He said, in full confidence of himself, he said, and I quote, "My boy, if you associate with me, the result will be that the very day you begin, you will return home a better person. And the same will happen the very next day too. Each day you will make progress." Well, this is not that bad, really. I mean, it's kind of fine, but Plato portrayed this as very negative. He didn't like him. He didn't like Protagoras at all. But it seems, though, that Protagoras was not just really a mere blusterer. For example, he said, and I'm quoting again, "Learning must begin early, that it must sink in deep roots to be effective, and that it requires practice and dedication. Quote, art without practice and practice without art are nothing." But apparently he disliked mathematics. He said, "The subject matter is unknowable and the terminology is distasteful." All right, that was Protagoras. Another one was Gorgias, who's contemporary, and apparently he lived until the age of 100. Did Gorgias, and became famous for his elaborate speech and his writings too. He took Athens by storm. He was actually from Sicily, and when he visited there, this was in about 427 BC, because he used to give public displays of his oratory skills and rhetorical skills to demonstrate the power of persuasion. And he could just actually make you change your mind, no problem. Okay, so he chose, for example, he chose the story of Helen of Troy there in Athens itself. And of course, you know that Helen of Troy was abducted by this guy called Paris. Okay, so he used this example and chose the least defensible of reasons he persuaded them that Paris actually had persuaded Helen to come along with him. And they all thought, oh, really? And, and he would choose examples like that. Okay, a fun person, I suppose. Another one was Hippias. Hippias was a man of wide interests who, besides taking rhetoric and mnemonics, the art of memory, he also contributed to mathematics and poetry and philosophy, a number of things. But he was best known for his speeches, and what all Hippias used to do he would be there in the middle of the crowd and just dare them, just say, okay, give me any topic you like, and he would automatically make a great speech about it, whatever the subject was. Well, some people can do this even today. I mean, just able to think fast on your feet, but you need to also know the subject, obviously. Xenophon was a pupil of Socrates, and he wrote about his trial and everything. And he asked him, one of the questions, how can anyone take laws seriously, given that, as often happens, the same people who make the laws later repeal them and put others in their place? That was, okay, start. Well, at least they repeal some. You know, our politicians today, they just keep adding them on. Actually, what he said was, let me get the quote here. What he actually said was, those who claim most confidently to pronounce upon them the laws do not hold the same theories, but disagree with one another like lunatics. Some lunatics do not even fear what is fearful, and others are terrified at things that aren't terrible. I was talking about the people too. How can you satisfy everyone with the laws? Some don't scruple to say or do anything, even in a crowd, and others feel that can't even show themselves in public. Let me see. Some show no respect for temples or altars or anything else that is sacred, and other people worship stones and woods and animals. Anyway, but Xenophon has actually a very good definition, I found, of what diplomacy is. I'm going to bring you from persuasion to diplomacy, but I'm just thinking that he actually said the difference between force and persuasion, convincing others by force or retaliation, and convincing them or persuading them that is not the right path to take. And he says, for violence, by making its victims sensitive to losses, rouses their hatred. But persuasion, by seeming to confer a favour, wins goodwill. I think that's a good definition of persuasion and also of diplomacy. Violence, by making its victims sensitive to loss, rouses their hatred. But persuasion, by seeming to confer a favour or a kindness, wins goodwill. He says, but I think that those who exercise reason, and for him that would also be diplomacy, and believe they are capable of teaching their fellow citizens what is for their good, are most unlikely to become unruly, since they know that violence involves enmity and danger, whereas persuasion produces the same results without the danger and in a friendly spirit. For the victims of violence feel that they have been deprived and are therefore resentful, while those who have yielded to persuasion are appreciative of having received a kindness. So violence is not to be expected of those who exercise reason. Such conduct belongs to those who have strength without judgment. Who would choose to kill people rather than have them as friends? So, let me go back here to my notes. That was Xenophon. There's another one, Antiphon, another guy. He was from Athens. This is interesting because he was a contributor to the debate about morality. Okay, we are in the 5th century BC. Okay, Christianity is not there. So when a debate about morality is about nature, natural law, as it were, and convention, that is, society's culture or traditions or morals. That was the debate. Natural law, the law of nature, they called it, or the law of convention. Now, the law of convention being about culture and tradition, you can very well see how you can say, well, there isn't such a thing as natural law because different peoples in different cultures consider what is good or bad or right or wrong differently in different ways. And not only that, but within one society, what we considered good before we now considered bad, smoking, and what we used to consider bad, now we consider good. So even within a society, those morals change. But you see, when you base it on culture and tradition, eventually you're going to end up on the individual. So within a culture, you're going to say, yes, I am of this culture, but for me, I don't think that this is wrong. Anyway, you end up in a subjective view of what is right and what is wrong. And the argument was, is there an inborn sense of right and wrong, or does it depend on culture, on your tradition? Antiphon kind of wanted it both ways. He said, perhaps that is where we are today in many ways. He said, and this is 5th century BC, okay, he said that when in society we should obey the laws of convention, but when we are alone we should obey the laws of nature. Well, I don't know. He thought that the laws of convention, of culture, often contradict the laws of nature, the natural law, making people, he said, suffer more pain when less is possible, have less pleasure when more is possible, and receive injury when it is not necessary. Lots of things to unpack here, but anyway. But being a sophist, he maintained that the power of rhetoric can make the worse, this is the problem, can make the worse seem better in an argument, which presumably means that you could defend the laws of convention in morality against the natural law of morality, even when this makes people suffer more. So I think he's going a little bit round in circles. Anyway, another one was Critias, and Critias, he defended conventional law. He says human life was once without order, on the level of the beasts, subject to force. There was no reward for the good and no punishment for the bad. In other words, a state of nature that Jean-Jacques Rousseau actually admired in the 18th century. He was urging us all in urban societies to go back to nature and being the honorable savage, as he called it. He says, okay, so human life, this is Critias, human life was once without order, on the level of the beasts, subject to force. There was no reward for the good and no punishment for the bad. And then people established laws as punishers, he says, so that justice could be the mighty ruler of all, equally, and make violence its slave. Actually, this brings us to Hobbes, the English philosopher. Hobbes lived from 1588 to 1679. And he wrote a book, very important book, that every student has to study in politics and philosophy, certainly, history, the Leviathan. And he says the state of nature for him was the source not of good, but of ill. And he took the application of reason to bring justice into the world. In his book, The Leviathan, he says, he has a famous quote, everybody knows it. Without government, he said, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Well, we have to ask, okay, Mr. Hobbes, but where do you get the sense of justice? Not justice, but the inborn sense of justice from, that even a 4-year-old has. Yeah, that's not fair. Are we born with it or not? Are we born with a sense of right and wrong? We have to debate that. So what you see is that they all have their arguments, and we're talking about persuasion. And when you are a young undergraduate, you start reading Hobbes or whoever, and you say, yeah, that makes sense to me. And then you read the opposite view, and then you say, that makes sense to me too. And that is the art of then thinking and thinking critically, begin to dissect. Yes, because there are tricks here. Okay. Well, Socrates came to the rescue. Philosophy is the pursuit of truth, he says, and it cannot be constrained by the necessity of winning a case or an argument and or earning a fee. And of course, today, this was very powerful. He made it very clear. And today we still are sort of skeptical about opinions that, have been paid for, kind of thing. The sponsored editorials in newspapers or pharmaceutical companies paying doctors for prescribing some drugs, or politicians acting on behalf of donors or those who will increase, if not their bank account, at least promote their own interests and so on. Socrates' point holds. Truth should not be for sale. Okay. Let me go back. Okay. No doubt, he says that many professed philosophers would say that a just man can never become unjust, nor a self-disciplined man become a bully, just as anyone who has learned a subject can never become ignorant of it. What seems clear to me is that just as those who do not exercise their bodies cannot carry out their physical duties, so those who do not exercise their characters cannot carry out their moral duties. Or the mind exercise also needs exercise in thinking critically and reading. They can neither do what they ought to do, nor avoid what they ought to avoid. That is why fathers and mothers keep their sons and daughters away from bad men, because they believe that the company of good people is a training in excellence, while the company of bad people is the ruin of it. You know, Socrates in his trial, he was accused of corrupting the young, because he would make them think. He never gave any answers. He would simply ask questions. So a young man will say, well, this is like this, and he would say, why? And he would continue asking questions. And it's very enjoyable, the way he does it. In other words, he was trying to teach, think before you come out with your conclusions. So he was accused of corrupting the young. In other words, not to blindly accept what is being told to you, even if it is a government. He wasn't teaching disobedience. He wasn't teaching to rebel. He was just teaching, think about it first. Think critically. So he was not teaching against disobeying the law. On the contrary, the verdict came that he was guilty, and so he was condemned to death by poison. And even though his friends and even the jury, there were no judges then, it was just the jury who deliberated and gave their verdict at the end. They were a little bit uncomfortable about it, and they made it possible for him to escape and all kinds of things. But he said, no, I was convicted and found guilty, and I shall obey the law. And he drank the poison himself, willingly. One of the prosecutors, his name was Charicles. He summoned him, and he called his attention to the law that corrupting the young obviously was against the law, and he forbade him to converse with the young. He was not to engage in conversation at all with young people while he was being tried. Socrates asked if he was allowed to ask for information of a further, clarification about anything in that accusation, anything that he didn't understand. Was he allowed to ask questions during the proceedings? And they said he could. Well, said Socrates, I am prepared to obey the law. But in order that I may not offend anyone out of ignorance, I want you to make this point clear to me. When you ordered me to abstain from the art of debate with the young, is it because you think what I say is incorrect or correct? Censure. For if it is correct, you are prohibiting me from speaking correctly. And if it is because it is incorrect, clearly I would have to speak to make it correct. Now, Charicles was becoming a little bit annoyed with him. And he says, quote, and I'm quoting, okay? As you are a little dense, Socrates, he said, we issue you this warning, easy for you to grasp, all right? Do not converse with the young at all. Period. Full stop. Clear? Do not converse with the young. Well then, said Socrates, to prevent any misunderstanding, please give me a definition of what you mean by young. Up to what age exactly? As long as they are considered immature, they reply, too young to hold office or to serve in the council, young, immature, inexperienced. 30, let's say 30, that's it. You are not to converse with anyone under the age of 30. Not even if I'm buying something from them. And the seller is below 30. Can't I even ask the price? No, let me drink a little. Now, you might be thinking, oh, old Socrates here, he's just playing games. I mean, he's clever, he was clever, and he's just, playing games and so on. No, he was not. I can't read to you the whole beginning and the middle and the end of the trial here, okay? But what you would see very clearly is that he's not trying to be a pain in the neck. He's leading him by asking for definitions. In other words, be precise. Okay, what is young, what is converse, communication, if I talk with my hands. And he's leading him for Charicles to understand that he hasn't thought it through, and he's going to end admitting to something contradictory to what he had said in the beginning. That is Socrates' point. Okay, be precise about what you think. Prepare rather than just react. Okay, so that is actually what he's doing. Let me see if I have more quotes here. What is leading us here is persuasion, diplomacy, consequences. If all you have is beliefs and reasons, and you fail to see the consequences of, you haven't thought it through. That is what he's trying to teach him. Okay. So he says, well, can't I even ask the price of something? Yes, of course you can ask what the price is, said Charicles. But Socrates, he said, most of the questions that you like to ask are ones to which you already know the answer. That is the kind of questions that you must stop asking. Am I not to reply either, then? When a young man asks me something, if I know the answer, for example, where does Charicles live? Or where is he right now? Am I not to answer that? Yes, of course you can answer that, said Charicles. The people you will have to keep off, Socrates, are the cobblers and the carpenters and the smiths. In any case, they must all be really worn out anyway about hearing you always talking gibberish about them. Then, said Socrates, then must I also keep off the topics they ask me, say, about morality and piety and so on? Certainly, and keep away from herdsmen too. Otherwise, you might be decreasing the number of sheep in your herd, And he goes on and on. Consequences. Think and think critically. Don't just react. That is what they're telling us. For example, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Okay. Well, first of all, this is misunderstood. I think I said something about this ages ago. But it is misunderstood because what it meant originally was that the punishment has to be in balance, in accordance, proportionate to the crime or to the sin. Okay, so if I steal something from a shop, surely to be condemned to the death penalty is not appropriate. And if I kill a man, to punish me with a fine is not appropriate. So what it meant was it has to be in accordance, concordant punishment and crime, as it were. But in any case, sometimes now people regard it as retribution only, or punishment, as it were. But even if we were to see it in this light, even if we were to accept for a second this interpretation of an eye for an eye, these classics would remind us of the consequences of your actions. Think critically, think morally, certainly. Reason things out. Because what might appear a good idea, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and so on, I have bombed you and now you're going to bomb me double. Or I have done this to you and now you're going to do this to me. Consider that at the end of the day, it might be you yourself who end up blind or toothless. Persuasion, diplomacy. Thank you for listening to me today again. Bye-bye.